That night when my brother threw the party, I thought it would be just like every other weekend. Loud music, cheap drinks, nothing new. But I never expected his best friend to look at me the way he did. Since that night, everything's changed. It all started when I came home for the weekend. I didn't plan on seeing him, let alone wanting him. Coming home for the weekend always brought a strange mix of comfort and chaos. My old bedroom still smelled faintly like lavender and teenage rebellion, but the rest of the house had shifted, louder now, always full of people, music, and whatever plans my older brother had brewing. Tonight was no different. I barely had time to drop my overnight bag before he was pulling me into the kitchen, grinning like a kid and tossing me a red plastic cup. "Come on," he said. "It's just a few friends, nothing wild." That was a lie, of course. My brother never did just a few. By the time the sun dipped below the backyard fence, the music was thumping, bodies filled every room, and laughter echoed down the hallways. It felt like college again. Fast, a little dizzying, and laced with the kind of freedom I hadn't tasted in a while. I leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping something too sweet. When I noticed him, I knew him. Of course I did. He'd been around forever, just another face in my brother's group, always polite, always chill, the kind of guy who blended into the background, never demanding attention. But tonight, he stood out like a flame in a dark room. His name was Ryan. He had this quiet confidence that didn't scream for attention, it commanded it. Tousled dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that looked effortlessly styled, even though I was sure it wasn't. His jawline had sharpened since I'd last seen him, and he had that scruffy end-of-day stubble that somehow made his mouth more dangerous. A fitted charcoal t-shirt hugged his arms, hinting at muscle without trying too hard, and he wore a watch that looked expensive but worn, like it had stories behind it, and those eyes. Deep hazel, the kind that could look soft or sharp depending on the light. When he noticed me looking, he smirked, not in a cocky way, just enough to say, "Yeah, I saw you." "You've been upgraded," he said, sliding next to me at the counter, his voice smooth and a little rough, like gravel under velvet. I raised a brow. "Upgraded?" He glanced around the kitchen. From a little sister, hiding upstairs, to a mystery woman at the party. I laughed, brushing it off, though my stomach fluttered. Maybe I just learned how to do eyeliner. He tilted his head. "No, it's not the eyeliner. You've changed." His words hung there a second too long. His gaze didn't flinch, didn't wander. He was looking at me, not through me, and I suddenly felt more naked in that moment than I had in the backless dress I'd nearly chosen earlier. I smiled, pushing down the warmth in my cheeks. "You're a lot more talkative than I remember," he shrugged. "Maybe I was just waiting for you to notice." Before I could respond, someone called his name from the hallway, and he gave me a soft nod, brushing his shoulder against mine as he passed. It wasn't an accident. I tried to shake it off. He was just my brother's friend. Someone I'd known since high school, who used to steal pizza from our kitchen and crash on the couch after long nights of video games. But that boy was gone, and this man, he walked differently, talked differently. He was all quiet heat and slow smirks, and the worst part was, I noticed. As the night wore on, I kept bumping into him, not in obvious ways, just there. Every time I turned, he was within arm's reach. Grabbing a drink in the kitchen, slipping past me in the hallway, brushing behind me with a whispered, "Excuse me," that made the hairs on my neck rise. It wasn't loud or flirty or dramatic. It was subtle, like we were playing a game neither of us had agreed to but both knew the rules. At one point I was leaning over the coffee table to grab a slice of pizza and felt the air shift behind me. When I turned, he was already looking away, but he had been watching. That much I knew, and the way my heart stuttered proved I didn't mind. I danced for a bit with a couple of friends, swaying to the music, letting the wine and lights carry me into a soft buzz. But even then, I could feel his eyes, not every second, just enough to keep me wondering. He hadn't touched me, hadn't said anything else, but I felt it. Between the glances, the tension, the half-smiles, something had shifted. He was just my brother's friend, but the way he looked at me that night told me something had changed. But there was much yet to come. The party didn't slow down. It shifted. The energy morphed into something hazier, looser, like the later hours always did. People spilled out into the backyard where fairy lights flickered overhead like lazy stars. The playlist had changed too. Less space, more rhythm, the kind of music that made your hips sway without thinking. I hadn't planned to dance. I'd been content leaning against the wall, drink in hand, playing observer, but my friends had other plans. "Come on," Jess shouted over the music, pulling me toward the living room with a full grin. "Don't make me be the only one embarrassing myself out here." I laughed and gave in, setting my cup down and letting the music pull me under. We moved without choreography, just bodies lost in the beat. I could feel the pulse in my veins, the warmth from the wine, the laughter bubbling up from my chest, and for a little while, I forgot about everything. Until I turned my head and saw him. Ryan stood near the hallway entrance, half-shadowed, a beer bottle dangling from his fingers. He wasn't talking. He wasn't scrolling his phone or pretending not to watch. He was watching me. His eyes moved with me. Not in a possessive way, just attentive. Curious, drawn in, the way a man watches a flame. When I met his gaze, he didn't look away. He just held it for a breath, then gave the faintest smirk, and turned. Something low sparked in my stomach. I didn't know what it was, or maybe I did and didn't want to name it yet. Later, I ducked into the kitchen, needing a refill and a breather. The room had thinned out. Some people had left. Others were sprawled across couches or outside, voices softer now, music humming in the background like a heartbeat. I reached for the fridge just as someone else did, and our hands brushed. His fingers were warm. His skin was slightly rough, calloused like someone who worked with them. I looked up and met his eyes. Ryan, again, of course. "Sorry," we both said at the same time, then laughed quietly. "You first," I told him. He handed me the drink. "Ladies first," he murmured. I took it, but his hand didn't immediately drop away. For a second, our fingers stayed close, too close, and the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was loaded. He stepped a little closer, voice dipping low as he leaned in to be heard over the faint thud of bass. "You were dancing." I arched my brow, smiling, observant. "You're good at it." I rolled my eyes, even as my heart skipped. "That's the wine talking." "No," he said, tilting his head just slightly. "That's me talking." I couldn't help the laugh that escaped me, soft, surprised. His breath was warm near my ear, his presence close enough to make me lean just a little more against the counter for balance, though it had nothing to do with alcohol. "You always like this at parties?" I asked, teasing. His lips tugged up. "Only when I'm paying attention." "And you're paying attention to me?" I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't flinch. "Haven't stopped all night." There it was again, that hum, that spark. It moved through me like a slow, burning fuse. I was suddenly too aware of how little space there was between us, of the scent of his skin, warm cedar and something clean, masculine. Behind me, someone cleared their throat dramatically. "Wow," Jess said, grinning as she reached for a bag of chips. "Should we leave you two alone?" I laughed, backing off slightly, cheeks flushing. "You're ridiculous." Ryan smirked, but said nothing, just lifted his bottle slightly in mock salute before walking out toward the back patio. Jess leaned into me. "Girl?" I waved her off, trying to sound unaffected. "We were just talking." "Mm-hmm," she said, popping a chip into her mouth. "You know he's like, off limits, right?" "Why?" I asked, still watching the door he just walked through. "Because he's Ryan. He's basically a permanent fixture in your brother's life. The moment your brother finds out, he'll flip." I shrugged, pretending her words didn't sting. There's nothing to find out. She gave me a knowing look, but didn't push. The night drifted into softer moments. People peeled away. A few were asleep on the couch, with pillows pulled under their heads. Someone knocked over a lamp and muttered a groggy apology. The mess started piling up. Cups, crumpled napkins, forgotten plates half filled with chips gone stale. I wandered back into the kitchen, half out of habit, half to escape the lingering buzz in my head. That's when I noticed Ryan again, already there, sleeves rolled up, tossing empty cans into a trash bag. "You don't have to do that," I said, surprised. He glanced over his shoulder. "Yeah, but if your brother wakes up and sees this, he's going to make me help tomorrow anyway. Might as well score points early." I laughed, then grabbed a stack of Solo cups and started helping. "Well, in that case..." We worked together in silence at first, the clinking of bottles and rustle of trash bags the only sounds, but something about it felt natural, comfortable in a way that made me feel like this wasn't the first time we'd done it, like we were already in sync somehow. When we both reached for the same bowl, our hands touched again. Neither of us moved. His eyes met mine, and I saw it, plain as day. That's what I want. He didn't speak. Neither did I. but we didn't need to. He took the bowl, set it in the sink, then turned to me, slower, this time, measured. His voice was soft. "You're different now." "So are you," I whispered. He nodded, like he already knew it. I leaned against the counter beside him, arms crossed, feeling the space between us tighten again, thicken like syrup. Every word, every breath carried weight now. "You always like this at parties?" I asked again, more softly this time. He turned his head, the edge of his mouth twitching. "Only when there's someone worth noticing." Someone yawned in the hallway, breaking the moment. We stepped apart instinctively, but the current between us didn't fade. It just pulsed quieter, waiting. I tossed a few more things in the trash, unsure of what I was doing anymore. Cleaning, flirting, pretending this was nothing. He nudged my elbow lightly with his. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said too quickly, then softer. "Just didn't expect tonight to feel like this." He looked at me for a long second before answering. Neither did I. Outside, someone laughed. Inside, the silence pressed closer. It was getting late, but he wasn't leaving, and neither was I. The house had gone still in that specific way only late nights could bring. Most of the guests had either trickled out or fallen asleep somewhere they didn't belong. Limbs draped across armrests, half-empty cups abandoned on counters, laughter faded into soft, echoing memory. The music had long since died, and the lights were dimmed, casting everything in a low, golden haze. There was no one left trying to be loud or funny or charming, just fragments of the party lingering in the air like the scent of perfume on an old sweater. I moved quietly through the hallway, barefoot, trying not to step on anyone curled up on the floor as I made my way to the linen closet. My brother had asked earlier if I could find extra blankets for whoever was staying over, and with the buzz in my body finally softening into a quieter hum, it gave me something to do, something to focus on, something to help distract me from the fact that I was still very much aware of where Ryan was and where he wasn't. The hallway felt colder than it had earlier. My fingertips brushed against the wooden frame of the closet door before I pulled it open, reaching for the top shelf where the old quilts were stacked. I tugged out 2 thick throws and a couple of mismatched pillows, the familiar scent of detergent and dust settling into my hand. The moment felt quiet, too quiet. I held my breath without meaning to, and then I felt it. Barely there, just a whisper of sensation, but it was enough. A brush against the back of my hand, warmth that hadn't been there a second ago. He was right behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't need to. The air shifted the way it does when someone steps into your space. My skin prickled with awareness. I could feel him, close enough to steal the air right out of my lungs. My pulse kicked up before he even said a word. And then, in a voice so low it barely made a sound, I heard, "Come here for a sec." Before I could ask where or why, his hand slipped gently around my wrist, light, not forceful, almost like a question in itself. And he guided me away from the closet, down the hallway, past the hum of a distant TV and the low murmur of voices behind half-shut doors. Every step we took, the world seemed to quiet more, like it was holding its breath right alongside me. He led me to the laundry room, small, tucked away, dim, the kind of space no one would look for us in. The door creaked closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. A single strip of hallway light peeked under the door, just enough to sketch out the outline of his face, his shoulders, the way his chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths. I leaned back against the counter, letting the folded towels press into my lower back for support, but they did nothing for the swirl of heat rising in my stomach. I wrapped my arms around my midsection, not because I was cold, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was electric. Dense with everything we'd said without words all night. My heart was pounding hard enough I was sure he could hear it. And still, he didn't move. He just stood there, his hands at his sides, his gaze locked on mine like I was the only thing in the world worth looking at. His eyes were different in this light. Not the casual, playful glances he'd thrown me hours earlier in the kitchen or across the living room. These were darker, steadier, and impossibly focused. He wasn't teasing anymore. He wasn't smirking. He was serious, intentional. Every line of his face held restraint, but only just. I didn't say anything. My mouth was dry. My thoughts weren't even coherent at this point. Just waves of sensation, instinct, and confusion crashing against each other with every breath. There was so much I wanted to ask, but none of it mattered right now. We were here, alone, inches apart, and all that stood between us was the first move. He stepped forward, slow and measured, like he was giving me time to stop him. I didn't. His hand lifted, not to grab me or pull me closer, but to hover near my jaw, his knuckles brushing the edge of my cheek like a whisper. I didn't even know I'd closed my eyes until I felt that first touch. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, just that single feather-like connection that sent a jolt down my spine and made my breath catch in my throat. He didn't kiss me. He waited, and when I opened my eyes again, he was still watching me, still waiting. That was when he finally asked, his voice low and barely audible, "Do you want this too?" My lips parted, but no sound came out, only breath. My throat was too tight, my chest too full. I nodded. That was all it took. He kissed me, and it wasn't soft, it wasn't gentle or cautious or anything remotely uncertain. It was full and immediate, like a dam breaking after being held too long, like he had been thinking about it all night, or longer. His mouth crashed against mine in a way that stole the floor from under me. His hand cradled the back of my neck, pulling me into him as if he couldn't bear another second without it. Our mouths moved fast, needy, desperate, like we'd been starving and suddenly found air. My hands found his shirt, fingers twisting in the fabric just to hold on, just to make sure this wasn't something I'd imagined. His body pressed into mine, and the warmth of him spread through me like fire, licking along my ribs. He groaned into the kiss, low and muffled, and it did something to me, something that made my knees threaten to give out. There was nothing to be careful about. This was heat and tension, and all the quiet looks we hadn't named, exploding into something we couldn't stop. His thumb stroked along my jaw, and my mouth opened for him instinctively. It wasn't a question anymore. It was an answer. And God, it felt like the most honest thing I'd experienced in a long time. His kiss deepened, like something inside him had finally snapped loose, and I matched it without hesitation. My back pressed hard into the counter, but I barely noticed. My fingers were tangled in the collar of his shirt, pulling him impossibly closer, and his hand slid to my waist like he needed to feel every inch of me to believe this was real. The laundry room was small and dark, but it might as well have been another world. There was no house, no party, no rules, just the ache between us, roaring into life. He groaned softly into my mouth as his hand slipped beneath the hem of my shirt, fingers brushing bare skin. I gasped, the sensation electric, my body arching into him before I could even stop it. Every time his lips left mine, to trace the curve of my neck, I had to bite down on a whimper just to stay quiet. The door wasn't locked. There were people asleep only a room or two away. My brother could have walked down that hallway at any second, but somehow, that only made it worse. More dangerous, more impossible to stop. He lifted me suddenly, hands gripping my thighs as he pressed me back onto the washing machine, the metal surface cool against my skin. I gasped again, but this time not from surprise, from heat, from the way he looked at me between kisses, eyes dark, jaw tight, like he was still holding back, but only just. His fingers traced the outside of my thighs, dragging up slowly until they dipped beneath the fabric of my shorts, and my breath hitched so sharply it echoed in the silence. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, voice wrecked. I shook my head, breathless. "Don't." That was all it took. His mouth was on mine again, devouring, and we lost ourselves to it. His shirt came off first, and my hands were everywhere. Chest, shoulders, the line of his back, every part of him solid and warm and real. He made quick work of my top, slipping it over my head before tossing it blindly to the floor, and his mouth found my collarbone, my chest, his lips moving lower with every ragged breath. I had never wanted someone like this. Not this fast, not this much. The fabric between us felt unbearable. We tugged at it, pushed it aside, kissed between each stolen second of breath. His fingers slid beneath the band of my underwear, and I gasped again, louder this time, and he pressed his forehead to mine, eyes squeezing shut like he was trying to hold on. "You have to stay quiet," he murmured, barely audible. "I know," I breathed, but I didn't care. He entered me slowly, carefully, as though even now he wanted to be sure. But once I pulled him closer, wrapped my arms around his back, and whispered his name into his ear, there was no going back. The first thrust made my body tremble. The second made me bite my lip hard enough to taste blood. By the third, we were moving together, in rhythm, in silence, in fire. My hands clawed at his shoulders, his breath warm against my neck, his lips pressing kisses to whatever skin he could reach as he drove deeper into me. Every motion was deliberate, drawn out, like we wanted to stretch this moment as long as we possibly could. The tension, the stolen breaths, the thrill of doing something so wrong, so forbidden, in the middle of my own home. His best friend's house made every sensation sharper. I clung to him like I was afraid of falling, but in a way I already had. The machine creaked beneath us with each movement, but the noise was muffled, thankfully. Still, the risk of being heard pulsed in my veins like adrenaline. If my brother came down the hallway, if he heard anything at all, it would be over. Everything. But even as that fear pressed against the back of my mind, I couldn't stop. Neither could he. He buried his face in my neck, muffling a low groan, and I stifled a cry against his shoulder, our bodies locking tighter as the rhythm grew faster, needier, more desperate. I could feel myself slipping, unraveling, and the second I broke, shaking, moaning softly, my nails digging into his back. He followed. He pressed into me one last time, hips grinding slow and deep, and then stilled. We stayed like that, tangled, trembling, his body heavy against mine, both of us trying to catch our breath in silence. The only sound was our breathing. Shaky, shallow, barely under control. For a while, neither of us spoke. His forehead rested against mine. My hands ran gently across the back of his neck. The fire between us had quieted, but it hadn't gone out. If anything, it burned deeper now, beneath the skin. I closed my eyes, still trying to believe what had just happened. His fingers laced with mine, still resting on my thigh, and he didn't move. He didn't pull away, didn't joke, didn't say we should forget it ever happened. That scared me more than anything, because it meant he felt it too. I glanced at the door, half expecting it to fly open, half dreading the echo of my brother's voice shouting in shock. But it never came. We were still alone, hidden in the shadows, safe for now. Ryan finally looked up, brushing his knuckles softly across my jaw. "You okay?" I nodded slowly, heart still pounding. "Yeah." He kissed me again, softer this time, slower. It wasn't rushed or hungry. It was something else entirely, something that felt like it meant more. He helped me down from the washer, his hands steadying me as I tried to find my footing again. My legs felt weak, my skin still tingling, my mind still spinning. I reached for my shirt, but he caught my wrist before I could move. "Hey," he said, voice quieter now. It wasn't just me, right?" "No," I said quickly, too quickly. "It wasn't." He smiled then, just faintly, and let go of my wrist. We dressed in silence, each piece of clothing bringing us one step closer to the world we'd have to return to. One where this moment couldn't exist in daylight, one where we'd have to pretend. But when we opened the door and stepped into the hallway, we didn't go our separate ways. He didn't leave, and I didn't want him to. We slipped into my room without a word. We were supposed to go our separate ways when the night ended, but we didn't. The morning light slipped in slowly, warm and golden, spilling across the bed like it had no idea what had happened in the dark. My eyes opened before I wanted them to. For a second, I couldn't remember where I was, or why I felt like I'd been holding my breath in my sleep. But then I felt the weight beside me, the steady rhythm of someone else breathing, the warmth of skin against mine, and the undeniable soreness in places that hadn't been touched in too long. Ryan was still here. His arm was wrapped around my waist, fingers resting lightly against my hip. His face was close, mouth slightly parted, lashes casting soft shadows across his cheek. He looked younger like this, softer, but no less breathtaking. We hadn't spoken much after slipping into my room last night. We didn't need to. The moment the door closed behind us, we kissed again. Slower, this time, deeper. Like the first time there was fire, and this was ash, still glowing. We tangled beneath the sheets, limbs searching, mouths finding. When we finally collapsed, skin damp, lungs empty, we didn't move. We just stayed there, breathing, feeling, letting silence say what neither of us could. Now, in the morning light, I didn't want to move. I didn't want to break this fragile thread between us. But the house was beginning to stir. I could hear it, muffled footsteps in the hallway, a cough, a door creaking open. My brother will be awake soon. And if he found Ryan here? I eased out of bed carefully, one leg at a time, gathering my clothes in a quiet shuffle. Ryan stirred slightly, but didn't wake, only pulling the blanket tighter around him, burying his face in the pillow I had been lying on. I stood there for a moment, just watching him, trying to decide if last night had really happened, if I hadn't imagined it, but the ache in my body said I hadn't, and the softness in his features, even in sleep, told me it hadn't been meaningless. I slipped into my room and closed the door gently behind me. The house felt colder now, The buzz of the party was long gone, replaced with that dull quiet of morning afters, mismatched socks on the floor, empty glasses in the sink, and the lingering scent of too many colognes still hovering in the air. I showered quickly, tying my hair back, throwing on the first soft thing I could find. My mind was racing, replaying everything, every breath, every sound, every look. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, half expecting something about me to look different. I didn't. Not on the outside, but something inside me had shifted. By the time I made it to the kitchen, my brother was already at the stove, flipping eggs with a spatula like nothing in the world had changed. I gave him a sleepy smile, grabbed a mug, and poured myself some coffee, trying to act normal. "You sleep okay?" he asked, without looking over. "Yeah," I lied, sipping too quickly and burning my tongue. More people wandered in one by one. Friends of his, some I barely knew, groggy and yawning, rummaging for cereal. The kitchen buzzed with casual noise. No one noticed anything, no one suspected a thing, until he walked in. Ryan, hair is a little messy. Shirt slightly wrinkled, but calm. Completely unbothered. Like he hadn't spent the entire night tangled up in my sheets, whispering my name into my skin. Like he hadn't kissed me, like he'd been waiting years for it. My heart stuttered the moment our eyes met. He didn't react. Not right away. He moved through the kitchen like everyone else, gave a lazy half-smile at someone's joke, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and leaned against the counter beside my brother, who was still focused on the eggs. I tried not to stare. I tried so hard not to give anything away, and he did the same until no one was looking. That was when he glanced at me. Quick, sharp, but full of something that made my knees go soft. No regret, not guilt, but a promise. A silent message sent across the crowded kitchen like a secret coded in a single look. I felt it in my chest, in my stomach, all the way down to my toes. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. We'd already said everything with our hands, our mouths, our bodies. The way he kissed me, like he didn't want to stop. The way I let him. I sat there in a daze, swirling the coffee in my mug, as the morning continued around me like nothing had happened. But everything had. Everything. What now? Was it a mistake? Would it happen again? Should it? I didn't know. I couldn't think clearly enough to answer any of it. All I knew was the way he looked at me across the room. All I knew was the fire in my chest hadn't gone out just because the sun had come up. When I left the kitchen, I didn't say goodbye. I just slipped back into my room, closed the door, and leaned against it with my eyes shut. My heart was still racing. He was just my brother's friend. Until last night. And now, I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he touched me. About how right it had felt. About the way he made me forget every reason I shouldn't have done it. Maybe. A secret we'd forget by morning. But we didn't. And now, every look, every breath reminds me of what we did. Of what we are when no one's watching. He's still just my brother's friend, and I'm supposed to pretend nothing happened. But how do I ignore something that felt that real? What would you do? Would you shut it down before it explodes? Or dive deeper into the fire? I'm stuck somewhere in between. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because right now I don't know how this ends, and the worst part, I wasn't sure I regretted it at all. It was supposed to be one night, a mistake. Because this is just the beginning.